Hi there and welcome to this quick update for Motion Symphony. Today we're going to look at calibration and how it's going to look basically at release. So what is calibration? Why do we need it? Well, basically in motion matching, we're matching a whole bunch of things. We're matching the distance between joints, we're matching the distance between trajectory points. But how do we tell the system which ones are more important? For example, the movement of the feet, the pose of the feet may be more important than the pose of the hands, and we want to be able to tell the system that. We also need to differentiate between angles. For example, angular velocity and linear velocity might have different weightings that need to be there. Or for example, on trajectories, you have trajectory position and trajectory facing. You can't directly compare degrees to meters. It doesn't really make sense. So you need to have weightings to kind of normalize all the atoms in the system that are getting compared when it's doing the cost function. Now, if that didn't make sense, don't worry. Calibration is basically you put the right weightings in and you get better results. And there will be plenty of tutorials on how we actually do that when it comes out. But I want to show you how that is going to be set up in the system. So we see how we have our motion matching node in our animation graph, and it takes this calibration asset. Now, I've done put a lot of effort into splitting up data into assets so that we can have a more modular approach, because we're probably going to be using these calibrations and configurations multiple times in different anim data sets. So let's just have a look at this. That's also based on my experience with motion matching for Unity. Modularization has been one of the biggest feature requests, so I might as well have it in from the start. So let's have a look first at the configuration. So this is where we can actually configure our what we are going to match. So it has a source skeleton because it has to be based on the skeleton. We can tell it its trajectory points, negative being in the past, positive being in the future, so 1 second into the future here, 5 points, and we can also tell it which bones to choose. Now, previously this was fixed into the motion data, but since we're going to be reusing this information a lot, I've decided to put in a separate asset, and then in our motion data we can just slot it in right there, and it'll just use that same configuration every time. Now, from our configuration, that tells us what to match. Our calibration tells us how to match it, how to do the cost function, or what weightings to use for that cost function. So we can create these assets by going to animation, and we got a mirroring profile, motion calibration, motion data, and motion match config. These are all part of Motion Symphony, and we can create a very simple asset that we do reference our config, because if we're going to say how we're going to match it, we need to know what we're going to match, as in the config. So we've referenced that, and we don't need that advanced tab. You could go as simple as just having the defaults. So we set the default weight of all joints, we set the default velocity weight of all joints, set the weight of trajectory positions and the trajectory facing angles. So we can just set the default and I'll just apply it across the board. We've also got weights for momentum, which is linear velocity, and weight for angular momentum, which is angular velocity matching. The reason I changed the name to momentum is because it's more intuitive, and that's the actual result you get. So the higher this value, you preserve momentum more. The lower the value, you preserve it less. And so it's more intuitive to call it momentum, even though it's matching linear velocity. So, and we also have the quality versus responsiveness ratio slider. This is the famous slider that is in every motion matching talk. So here it is. You slide it left to be more pose focused, higher quality. You slide it right to be more responsive. You end up being somewhere in the middle, a little bit left or right. But that's the tweak slider that you can do once you've got everything else nice and good. Now, of course, you can go into the advanced tab and change every single atom's weighting. So you've got every joint, and from every joint you've got their position, velocity, resultant velocity, and for every trajectory weight you've got their position and facing. Don't worry if you don't understand this now. There'll be tutorials when this comes out. Calibration is a bit of a dark art, but once you learn how to do it, it's really not that bad. So you can go as far as you want, or you can even make your own custom calculation for these weightings, and we can do that by just creating a new blueprint, and we can inherit from the calibration, the motion calibration here, However, I've already made one and I don't want to redo it just for the sake of it. We've got all our normal settings on the left here, but what I can do is I can create my own variables, my own multipliers to then calculate the weightings, and that's going to be calculated once at the when it's loaded on initialize. So it's not a performance problem. And we have these variables that we can tweak now instead of having to tweak every single one. And how you set that up is up to you. Basically what you do is you override these functions, so calculate joint weights. And you can see at the end here, I'm just setting the weights, the position, velocity, resultant velocity of every single joint that I have decided to match. And I've got all these other multipliers that multiply together so that when I tweak these values, I can have control that I want to have. It's hard to say why you would want this until you've actually experienced it. But changing each individual joint is not so nice, whereas this is a little bit easier once it's set up. So you can see, for example, here, all the hands are being multiplied by half weight. I'm saying they're half as important. For the pelvis, I'm saying it's doubly important, but only the velocity is only 1.5 times, and the resultant velocity is 0 because I'm not interested in that matching that for that a particular bone. And then the feet, I'm just giving it the base weight. So you have that for the joints, and then you can override this function called calculate trajectory weights, and it's a similar concept here. I haven't actually filled out this loop, but here I'm actually going to loop through each trajectory point and give it a weight based on its time. So you can do things like give past trajectory points higher weights than future trajectory points. And yes, you can go through and actually set them manually in here, but that can be a bit tedious. Whereas if I set this up once, I can go to my variable past trajectory multiplier and say, well, past trajectory is going to be 0.8 times as important, and future trajectory is going to be twice as important, for example. And now I can actually access the trajectory times, and I could even say, make a calculation based on the time of that trajectory point. So you can kind of use it as you like to tweak your calibration and make your own method of calibration instead of having to say every single atom's weight. So that is basically it for calibration. My goal is to make it as simple as it could be really simple. You just have this single asset here and you just set the defaults, to being full controlled, which can be quite complex but is very useful, particularly when something's not working. And yeah, basically all of these assets, they just get slotted into each other. So it goes into our motion data asset, and yeah. So one other thing I'll just show you. I've been working on this. This is the tagging timeline, trying to make it inconsistent with the latest stuff in Unreal. Unfortunately, I couldn't just use theirs. It's it's not accessible unless I'm rebuilding the engine, which I can't do for a plugin. So yeah, setting that up, going to add the tags here, and it's my ideas is going to look exactly like your notifiers, but they're not going to be notifiers, despite me saying that last time I did an update. They'll be their own thing. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this update. I'm working on this thing every day as fast as I can to get it out, but it's got to be in the right place, and these are definitely a few steps towards usability that I think need to be there. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.